Welcome back to Sales Talk with Mike and Caesar. This is episode 3. And Mike, what are we going to talk about today?
Hey guys, so the topic of today's episode is what you need to know about getting started in a career in sales. So we're going to be focusing on some challenges you're probably not going to be expecting when you start out, some key traits or misconceptions that people talk about that maybe aren't very accurate, and anything else, any other advice Caesar and I can give you based on our experience starting and continuing to work a career in sales.
Yeah, perfect. And I think one of the things that we want to get right off the bat, like start off with right off the bat, is you know getting into sales. Obviously, we both kind of started off differently. Um, you know, what was your first real introduction to sales? Like, what was something that you saw that you said, you know what, I need to put that in my arsenal, for example?
Yeah, so I mean, like we mentioned in earlier episodes, I got into sales from a totally different career path. But when I first got into sales, something that everybody was talking about was that you have to be a great talker, and that's actually one of the reasons I gave it a shot. I'm a talkative guy, and everyone's like, "Oh wow, you're a great talker. You'd probably be great in sales," which kind of, I don't know about you, but that artificially inflated me because that is total BS,
Yeah.
in my opinion. Like, what do you think about that?
You know what? Like, I think for anybody that loves to talk, loves to be in front of people, present, there's that initial draw to the sales piece, right? To be able to do that because you're going to be doing that quite a bit, right? Whether you're doing it virtually or in person. If you have that ability, I think it's great, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to sell more or sell better than other people, right? And you're
Yeah.
100% right. It's kind of that misconception that if you can talk, you can talk through things. But a lot of times now, and I feel like people can read through that bullshit pretty
Yeah.
quickly, and then you become that slimy used car salesman type guy where you're just talking and giving off advice or info that may be not necessary.
Yeah, and like I feel like if you go into it because someone pumped your tires saying you're a great talker, you'll be great in sales, it might actually like handicap you. I know that like when I started, I was in for a rude awakening because you get your first sales job and you realize it's not about being a smooth talker, it's about doing a ton of discovery, prospecting, cold calling and getting absolutely shit on and rejected call after call. You
Yeah.
don't even get an opportunity to be a smooth talker for like months.
And you know what, kind of hearing that piece right now, we you're talking about, I think is probably the most important thing that I've ever learned about being in sales is that discovery piece is all about asking questions, right? And I think for me, and I think obviously for you, Mike, too, being a good listener is actually probably one of the number one traits when it comes to being in sales. The ability to like hear maybe something that you weren't expecting to hear, to be able to obviously maybe expand onto an opportunity or a discussion, and asking one question. Those, I think the idea of asking a lot of different open-ended questions, but it's also listening to those answers because that will actually allow you to ask the next best question, right? I think for me, that's one of the biggest parts of being a good salesperson or any good salesperson that I've ever seen is that their ability to listen. And it's something that sometimes people get away from a little bit. And I'm sure you've seen it. Now that you're a BDR manager, that's probably something that you kind of drill into your BDRs, right?
Yeah, like the hardest thing that try to coach out of people is you have people who naturally try to be slick talking, using a lot of cliches, trying to like chuckle their way through a deal, and it's tough because the number one thing is being able, like you said, to be a good listener. But while listening, you need to be active in your listening and be able to ask good questions as you're listening. And if you're just focused on saying the next funny line or, you know, greasing your way through a conversation, you
Yeah.
tend you tend to miss out on some of these really important questions. So yeah, that's an amazing point. And I think that's like a good jump off point for what I think is probably going to be the meat and potatoes of this episode. It's the fact that sales is really hard. It's amazing. It's fun. It's probably the only thing I think I could do. Like, obviously, I do YouTube and stuff, but like at
Yeah.
its core, it is very, 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 very hard. And what Caesar just mentioned, like Caesar, you're talking about asking questions. that seems easy when you tell someone to do that. Oh, I'll just ask questions. That's great. But
Yeah.
when you're on the phone with someone who's either trying to rush you off the phone, or they're not a very good listener, or you don't know what questions to ask because you're talking to someone in an industry that you're new in, that is insanely difficult. Like, have you like? I was going to ask, have you ever had experience where it's
Oh,
hard to ask question, but the answer is obviously right?
oh yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that, part of being in sales, especially early on, is understanding that you're obviously going to, swing a lot more, like swing and miss a lot more than anything, right? And coming down to it, you have to have that bit of that thick skin, but you know, each of those calls are always going to be, or each of those meetings are going to be a bit of a learning point for you, right? Because you may have struck out asking this particular question to somebody, but and your next question could have actually maybe picked something up from, or they may have said something else, right? You start to pick up triggers from those individuals. So the more at bats you have, and it's obviously we're using a lot of sports analogies now, but it's true that the more times you're going at it, you're not going to be the best right away, but you keep batting it and keep plugging away, you'll see a lot of those questions start to be almost second nature to you, where now you're asking questions that are could pique somebody's interest, right? You might ask them about the fact that you've done some homework and research on that company, and you say something to them that that will allow you to get an extra minute or two, right? When you're cold calling people, and Mike, you see this probably every day working with your team, you only have a few minutes to be able to talk through, even that, if that, really, right? So how do you do that? And it's really comes down to kind of putting your head down, working hard, because it's going to be hard work, but also starting to learn from the mistakes you made before, right? So I think, as you said, it is a hard job with lots of perks though to it, right? Because you
Yeah.
have the ability to learn things, be better at a lot of different things when it comes to like presenting or asking questions. And it, I think we touched back on this before in our previous episodes, where there's that layered approach of like that's been with a lot of large companies, where they actually show you that these are the step process, because you're starting to learn how to ask questions in the initial phases, moving on to bigger questions when you become like a from an S thing, like you said, like a sales rep, to BDR, to an AE, and further. And as you progress through your career, right, you're learning all these steps to be better at what you're doing, right? So it's hard work. Nothing's ever easy, and obviously, I think sales is one of the oldest oldest types of jobs, but it is very fruitful if you end up plugging away and doing the right work.
Yeah. So before we get into like how fruitful it can be, we talk about sales being
Yeah,
hard, right? And I really want
yeah,
to dig into this
yeah,
more because the topic of this episode is what you need to know about starting in sales. I think we really need to hammer home how hard it can be and the different types of hard you'll
yeah.
experience, because we talked a lot about asking questions, right, and working hard. Um, but in your experience, like what else is hard? Like, what are some of the common pitfalls that cause someone to either get fired or quit within their first couple months?
Yeah, I think the first piece is understanding, like, let's talk about an AU role, for example, right? Um, an AU role, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, it could be anywhere from 20 to 30% closing based on your pipeline or everything, right? So you're not, so you're building up a lot of work and a lot of pipeline to be only really basically be 20 to 25% of like right when it comes to actually your
So
closing,
just
right?
so people know what you're
Yeah,
talking
sorry.
about, pipeline is once you've kind of found something or a company that you think you might want to sell to, you try to estimate how much money you could potentially sell to them.
Yeah,
As you kind of progress through selling to them, that pipeline is the pool of possible dollars you could bring into the company. And what Caesar's talking about is that most account executives, or probably good account executives, are able to close around 20%
yeah.
of whatever they've found as potential customers in their pipeline.
Exactly. And I think one of the biggest things where you see people get really down, especially in like, for example, an AU role, is their inability to build that pipeline, right? Because they may not necessarily, you know, there's a lot of luck involved, and there is, but like as you said earlier, there's a lot of hard work to it too as well, right? So if you're not putting that effort into creating those pipeline deals, or sorry, that pipeline, I've seen people get down on themselves, that they're not necessarily pushing themselves as hard, or they're not finding the right opportunities, or the opportunities aren't big enough. And that can weigh on people, right? Because a lot of AEs that have been successful somewhere else and they're coming to a new role, or they're relatively new in it, they don't understand that it isn't very much a long game, right? You are building that up to be able to do things, and you want to be very strategic the way you do it. But I think one of those things where I've seen is where people aren't building that pipeline, and they're not being successful to do that, and they don't see what they could do, or they're not giving themselves enough time, because they're not putting in the work, right? And that's where management might step in and say, you know what, you're not doing the necessary things to be able to build that pipeline. Because if they're seeing you working hard and building that pipeline, their idea is that you'll be able to close that. But if you're not doing those things, you're not, right? So that's a long-winded way of it. So what about you, Mike?
I guess if I were to summarize what you're saying, just simply put, like you're saying that one of the big pitfalls a lot of new AEs face is when they realize that they need to work really hard to build pipeline, it can be
Yeah,
discouraging if they're not able to. Is that kind of a
exactly.
good summary? Okay,
Exactly. Yep.
cool. So I'm going to take it more on like a granular level, but
Okay.
especially in my role right now. So I manage a team of BDRs, which are generally pretty green entry level sales reps. A lot of people don't make it because they don't realize how much actual effort is required in sales in the form of actually doing day-to-day tasks like calling or sending emails. So what I want to say is what you need to know about, in the vein of sales being hard is you need to be ready to be thrown into a position where you're going to be working hard. And if you're not making it to quota, or you're not doing a good enough job closing deals or whatever, you need to be ready for your manager, who sees you already working hard, coming to you and saying you need to work harder, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people get offended by that, right? Like you're going to come into a sales job for the first time, they're going to say, hey, you got to make 60 or 70 or 80 calls per day, right?
Yeah.
You're going to say, okay, great, no problem, I make 70 calls per day, I'm going to hit my quota, this is going to be great, I'm going to make a lot of money. You're halfway through the month, you found yourself making 70 calls per day, you're nowhere near quota, and your boss comes to you and says, hey, for the rest of the month, I need you to make 90 calls per day. You need to kind of make it happen to hit quota this month. You're on a monthly quota, make it happen. A lot of people hear that and they get pissed off. They get disgruntled. They don't want to do it. It's a
Yeah.
drag. They start just making calls to satisfy their manager, but they're not dialed in anymore. So for me, like especially for people who are watching this and have no sales experience or coming into it fresh, you got to be ready to do that stuff and be willing to be raked over the coals. And even if you're working really hard, they're going to ask you to work harder, or ask you to explain to them what you're doing to try to make it happen otherwise. Because the net of being in sales is you have a quota. Your boss and the company you work for will tell you the things you probably need to do to hit quota. But if you're doing those things and you're not hitting, the easiest thing for them to ask you to do is to just do more of what you're doing.
Mike, and when you're talking about entry level role, right? And you know, what do you do to help somebody that might be feeling that way, or doesn't necessarily know going in, what are the things or some of the key things that they need to do to be successful to hit quota, right? Is there something that you have done or seen before that you know is like maybe some advice to the people that are watching this that can kind of take back and say, okay, these are maybe little things that I could do, to not necessarily work a bit harder, but maybe work a bit smarter to be able to hit those marks.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a positive answer and a negative answer. So first things first, like the things I would do as a manager is, before we even get to this situation where they need to figure out a way, is you got to have realistic expectations set with you, right? So me as a boss, like I'm going to tell you very clearly what to expect in this role. So let's just assume that if I'm coming to you with solutions, we've already had that conversation, right?
Yeah.
So the positive answer here, like the sunshine and rainbow answers, is the work smarter, not harder. And that would be me telling you, okay, you've been banging your head against the wall, you're not having much luck. Maybe it's the quality of the accounts you're reaching out to. Maybe you got to spend some time rethinking who you're prospecting, like what type of accounts you're targeting. Maybe the accounts you're targeting aren't aligned with the company's value proposition. That's a very basic level thing that you can do.
Yeah.
But to be a little bit more strategic when we're talking about working smarter and not harder, it could be something as simple as automating a little bit more of your process. So, like a lot of companies nowadays, most companies use some form of an email automation tool, email sequencing tool, right? Like a big part of the job is going to be calling, but if you want to carve out a chunk of your territory and create a messaging sequence that you think has a really strong call to action and is really hitting on the value points of your organization, you could dump a couple hundred people every month into an automatic email sequence where you just monitor it, and every time someone clicks or opens one, you call those people right away, and you do that in tandem of kind of your cold calling and normal prospecting. I mean, those are two things. Like there's probably
Yeah.
a lot of approaches, and I mean, what I would say is, Caesar, like you asked me what I would suggest for someone who's having trouble early on. It's also really going to depend on where that person's having trouble, right? Like if you find yourself having trouble making the actual activities, there's two things that you got to be willing to do. You either got to really be real with yourself and say, hey, do I want to do this job? If yes, I need to find a way to make it happen and hit the metrics. If no, you should find a new job.
Yeah.
If it's something where you're having a hard time once you get people on the phone, you can't pitch them or they're hanging up on you, go talk to a more experienced rep or your manager, do some role play, practice pitching the value proposition or the elevator pitch, do that more often. Um, if it's if it's something where you're just not reaching people, maybe you're not utilizing the tools you have at your disposal to find the right contact info, right? Like if you have access to like a lead generation service like Zoom Info or LinkedIn, maybe you need to spend more time validating that you're actually calling the right numbers or have the right emails, right? There's
Yeah.
so many reasons that it could be tough. And when we talk about working smarter, most of the remedies we're talking about probably have something to do with, reassessing your day-to-day process or getting a little bit more strategic with where you're spending your time.
Perfect. I know we've kind of gone through a couple different scenarios of why sales is hard and it can be difficult. I know we touched on the fact that we talked about, you need to be a good listener and be able to ask good questions. One piece that we didn't really touch on, and it does go to the point of working hard, is the ability to do research, right? Whether you are in a BDR role, whether you're in AE role or an SR role, um, what is your take on research? And that's something that people coming into sales very early on don't know too much about, the fact that that is actually pretty a heavy part of the role itself, right?
So you're talking about researching your potential customers before you call
Exactly.
them?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that's definitely something that makes the job less hard, right? Like you could probably speak better towards this, but when you're trying to build a use case for a large company, especially like let's say you're an enterprise rep, they
Mhm.
probably have stuff in the news about their company or public information about their company
Exactly.
or accolades or awards that they've won scattered online. If you can come prepared with like, we used to sell environmental health and safety software. If you can come prepared with information on an environmental or green initiative they've tried to work on in the last year and tie that to your product in some way, you're going to have a lot easier time versus just trying to pitch your product, right? Because you're saying, hey, I know what your business is doing, I know what you guys care about, I know where you might be having problems, and you're connecting that with your solution. So research makes those conversations a lot stickier when you actually get them on the phone. Like, what's your take on that? You've probably done more of this than I have.
Yeah, I actually like the word that you use. It does make a conversation or the relationship that you're creating a bit stickier, right? When obviously when we talk about EHS or things from when you're selling like a CRM, for example, understanding what they're trying to do, right? I could look at a report and they could say, they want to have environmental aspects or impacts reduced by X number of years, right? And they'll kind of outline why they're doing that and how they're trying to do that. And as you said, you're trying to tie in that information that you're being able to process to what you're selling, right? And those conversations go a lot easier. They understand that you've actually put an effort to be able to have these conversations, and it obviously makes it a little bit easier for them to digest what you're selling, right? The fact if I were to go in and say this is what the software is going to do for you, without relaying it back or relating it back to any of the information that they have public or what they're looking to do in the future, they're going to look at somebody else or look at a different vendor, and they're probably going to have a different conversation, right? So the idea for you to be able to do research is always the initial point of understanding your customer first and foremost. And the second piece is the ability to tie in that understanding to what you're selling. Conversations go a little bit easier. You start to learn more about them, because then you learning about their company allows you to learn a bit more about that individual as well, right? They may have individual goals within that company. So if it's their initiative, well, how can you help them achieve their next promotion or their next position? And that's maybe something we can touch on at a later time, but that's where research really fits into what you're doing, right? Even for a BDR, calling into somebody that they have nobody or they have no information about, if they look at them on LinkedIn, understand that they've been in a role for 5-10 years or 5 years or 2 years, and say, hey, I understand you've been in this particular role 2 years, and tying back to what you're trying to sell will make that conversation maybe last a little bit longer, so that you can maybe set up an appointment for an AE, for example.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I'm just looking at the time here. We've been talking a lot about how hard sales is, and in the theme of this episode, where it's what you need to know about starting in sales. Why don't we kind of pivot a little bit and talk about some realistic expectations with regard to how rewarding sales can be? So, I mean, if you want to start us off, what can people expect?
Okay, let's put aside money for a sec. Obviously, that's the big thing. The ability to be kind of your own boss, or starting to learn how to be your own boss, is the initial piece of sales, right? Like, you get a territory, you get a patch, right? That is your business. Even though you're selling it for somebody, that is your business that you're selling, because you are kind of the face. So you becoming a bit of an entrepreneur and learning how to be able to go into a particular territory and learn how to sell that. Also, that kind of ties in to your time management, right? Your ability to have a bit more.
I was going to say, it changes you from being a 9 to 5 person who's watching the clock to someone who, your boss probably doesn't care what you're doing from 9 to 5 as long as it's related to selling, right? Like, you can get most of your work done in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, whenever you want, right? It gives you that level of, it's almost like a kid going to high school, right? Like, now you get to pick your classes. It's up to you to make it to the next class. I don't know if this is a good analogy. Maybe university is a better one, but basically, you have free reign to make it happen.
Exactly, because your days are going to be completely different every day.
Yeah,
you may have and I've gone through where I'm, I might not be on site, but I might be, I might have all day demos for one particular client, and then the next day I might have 4 or 5 discos. Comparatively, I might not have any demos for the following week. So everything changes, and your ability to adapt, because this is your business, allows you to be able to be a bit more strategic, learn how to be more strategic. And also, now I know something we touched on before, now it allows you to be able to expand your sales by bringing in different elements of the business to help you achieve your goals, right? So you start to it's interesting way of saying it, but it's like you're mapping out your accounts now, and you're mapping out your deals, right? And this gives you your ability, kind of going back to you're doing what you need to. Every day is going to be different, but the ability to do the things you need to do, allows you to be a lot more flexible with your time, but also, the amount of work that needs to be done to hit your quota to make the money that you're looking to do, right? So
another thing that, so I it's funny, I used to find this a really rewarding part, but as I got older, this became kind of a drag for me, but was the fact that you're going to travel, you might travel a lot, right?
Yeah.
Um, when I worked at Salesforce, like that was super exciting about becoming an AE. You're like, oh, I get to go to territory every month. It's awesome. And it is awesome. It's fun. You get to spend your
Yeah.
company's money to like wine and dine people and make it happen. But this is the but for me. It kind of put things into perspective after a while, which is, I guess you could say that's also rewarding. I started to like really value time with my fiance and family more because when
Yeah.
you're away drinking for 3 day, like a 3 day bender with clients once a month, um, that kind of becomes like a really hard weekend to do anything else in, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that was rewarding. Getting to travel, I got to see a lot of the U.S. I probably will travel more before I retire, but that was a big one for me.
No,
Is just kind of, and that goes into like the whole being your own boss thing. Like you're traveling and you don't have like some manager looking over your shoulder. Like they're trusting you to travel. They might be giving you a company credit card. You're going out and about representing this company in different cities in front of CEOs and different people. That was pretty cool, and I think that was really rewarding to me also because it turned me into more of a like I became a man because of that. Like I became more
yeah.
responsible. I
You're
matured a
creating your
lot.
own brand, really.
Yeah, yeah. Whereas before, like until you do that, you kind of view yourself as like, oh, does my boss think I'm screwing around? Like, do they
Yeah.
trust me? But once you start doing it, you're like, this is on me. I got to make this happen. I got to use this time to close deals. And it kind of elevates your level of responsibility and kind of like appreciation for what you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. I know when you talk about like the fact that there's that level of not necessarily respect, but like they're giving you the freedom to do the things you need to do. Um, you know, when you go on these sales trips, they're fun, but there's an end goal to everything, right?
Yeah.
If you're not coming back with a next step or maybe a signed contract, you know if you're not doing those things, those sales trips tend to now
Yeah.
become a little bit more scary, right? Because now you got to figure out how to make that money back, right? So,
Yeah.
like I've been lucky enough to very similar. I've been able to do a lot of trips to like Europe and South America because of work. It allows you to do those things, but you're right. For somebody that's when you're single, you don't have family yet,
Yeah.
it's awesome. But once that starts to happen, it does take a bit of time. Like I still travel a bit, obviously being in enterprise sales, and that is a must to happen, but not at the level that you were going or I was going back 5-10 years ago, right? So
Yeah.
that is good. It's great actually, but it could take a toll on yourself and your family as well, right? So that's something you need to
Definitely.
know.
Definitely. Yeah, no, that's a good one. Let's talk about the big one that we haven't talked about yet, money.
Yeah.
I think this one might be a little bit of underwhelming, but you can make a lot of money. You could also make like no money. That's that's what how I'm going to start this.
You can also make a lot of money 1 year and not money for a couple years, and then make a lot of money again 2 years later, right?
Yeah.
And there are times where if you're and I know people and have been lucky enough to make money too. Like you can do it as a steady way of doing it, but obviously there are years where you can blow it out of the water, which could affect the way you make money the following year, right? So,
Yeah.
but you're right though, and can you maybe you want to dig a little deeper into why that might happen, right? And
Yeah, so I mean, I'll first like start by saying like I have not been someone who's had like an absolutely astronomical like $2 million a year. Like you'll hear there's always someone at a company who's done that. I've been more of the like making more every year, but like it's like kind of just like scaling up. So I can tell you that I'm in this situation because I've jumped around and tried a lot of different roles. I've done SDR, BDR, AE. I've tried account management. Now I'm in management. I've touched a lot of different aspects of the sales cycle. Because of that, I'm churning and burning through a lot of different territories. I think you get into a situation where you might have those big astronomical, binks is you're probably an enterprise account executive,
yeah,
because and you are an enterprise account executive, so you can talk towards this. But deals could take years, right? Like it could
yeah,
take you 2 years to close a deal, and also as you're in the role and you're sticking in one role, it gives you an opportunity to nurture these really wide relationships at the organizations you're selling to. So, whereas if you're getting promoted every year or switching, getting a title bump or jumping into a different sales role every year, you might be getting a bump and then making more commission. You're selling to a new territory every time.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're an enterprise account executive and you stay in a job for 5 years, you might go the first 2 years making like your base, like whatever that is, 100, 150 grand. But then in year three, this
You can be killing it.
this huge deal that you've spent 3 years making, where you went from knowing nobody at Coca-Cola or whatever huge company you're selling to knowing 200 people, and you've brought together all these different teams, and you've gotten budget approved from like different entities and countries. That's where it happens, and you close that deal, you make a ton of money, and then you're kind of back to like kind of like a baseline, or maybe you have like some residual revenue coming in through service contracts or whatever. But
Yeah.
that's usually how that happens, right? So like, I guess I think the reason we're probably talking about this, I mean, we haven't mentioned it, but it's to be realistic. Like, you're going to hear these stories. Like every company I've worked in sales for, you hear the story about the guy who made $6 million the year before,
Yeah.
but nobody tells you, oh, this guy's been in the role for 10 years, is really good at the job, and has been working on this one account for like 5 years, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
But that's not to say like don't be discouraged if that's not you. Like that hasn't been me. Like Caesar, has that been you? Like I don't know personally, but
I've had some really good years, and I've also seen, similar to you, like where I had somebody on my team who basically for a couple of years was, did fairly well. Had a really big background, came from within the industry, so he had a lot of these like past relationships that he was able to bring to our company. And then, year 3 and 4, you saw like the fact that he brought those relationships, he nurtured them through those first couple of years, and he doubled his what do you call it, his quota, right? And it took a while. Like there were that bit of growing pains where he had those decent years where he was making decent money, but the last couple of years he was like just blowing it out of the water. And I think you're right though. It goes to those people that have the ability to do that. He was a bit older, so
yeah,
he had like 20 something years in the industry. I've moved around a little bit. Like my previous role, like I was there for almost 4.5 years, so like I was able to build a lot of that, very similar to what he was doing. Probably one of my biggest deals probably took about 3 years, because of I was building out the relationship, right?
yeah,
I think one of the things when obviously going from like a mid market or a small SMB role, the we always talk about like transactional sales versus consultative. Like when you get into these bigger deals, like you're looking at multiple stakeholders. You're looking at different people that you need to be able to build those relationships with, right?
yeah,
You can see the end zone, but you're pretty far away, right? Because you need to figure out what fits in, what are they actually looking for, and you also need to be able to understand what their end goal is as well, right? You build these relationships trying to help them get something better too, because if you can push them to do that, they're hoping you're hoping that they'll push back to you and say, what, we got this deal, right? So you're right, there are some, like obviously in tech sales right now, extremely lucrative to be able to get some of these big deals. You can look at like 30, 40, $50,000 bonus checks, bonus commissions, right? So
yeah,
there are there to be had, but you're right though, they're more than 12 months, right? You're not going to be able to do some, like, don't get me wrong, there's bluebirds. We all know people that have had bluebirds before, but those are an anomaly, right? The big deals are weighted out by the time, the effort, the hard work you put into them. Because if there's something there, you will keep plugging away until you either win it, and you hopefully win it. But that's the idea, is that you're building these relationships to take over the competition, and or unseat them so that you can
yeah.
actually make that big deal, right? So
And I think actually an interesting point to what you're saying there is, for people, and doesn't really apply to anyone brand new looking to get into sales, but if you have a little bit of experience, companies, especially in tech nowadays, are paying you to join their company, knowing that it'll take you a long time to close these big deals. Like base salaries have gone through the roof for
yeah,
account executive jobs at a lot of companies, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, 100% right now, especially where we're at right now. It is one of the biggest tech hubs in the world,
yeah,
and it is super competitive, right?
yeah,
So it is a workers market right now, right? So
yeah. So I guess the advice for anyone who's not in a sales role yet is the sooner you get in, the sooner you have a chance of either spending 3 years and closing a 500K deal and making 100 grand or whatever, or getting into an enterprise role, getting a base salary that's well into the 100K range, and chipping away as you hit quota every year. Like you don't necessarily need to make $1 million in 1 year to make a lot of money in sales. You could kind of just build your way up, hit quota every year, progress, get title bumps, hit accelerators. There's money to be
there,
had, right?
yeah, and there's different ways that the company will try to get you money as well, right? So as you said, or like service deals that may not actually amount to your quota, right? So these are ways that
Yeah,
you're making some extra money, monthly commission checks that are going to help you kind of see the fruits of your labor, right? So
yeah. Okay, last point before we wrap this one up. Sales can create many offshoot career paths. What does that mean to you, Caesar?
I think for obviously, I think as we were talking about right now, obviously the fact that sales gives you so many different paths within a company, right? Mike, you basically almost run almost every role within sales right now, right? Starting from
Hmm.
we run entry level all the way to management right now. So being in sales affords you the ability to make a name for yourself, right? And I think I said it earlier. You become a brand. You need to become
Yep.
a brand within your company, because that way people see you, they understand what you bring and what you can bring. And Mike, you're a perfect example of being able to go through one step. You obviously made the decisions to what made the right decisions for yourself. But you're in a position now that before you weren't, and you were able to step into something new, and you're excelling at it, right? So for me, like sales gives you and affords you that ability to not just make money, but makes you a bigger brand the
Options.
way you can be, right?
Yeah, it gives you up. And I was going to say too, you mentioned something interesting, creating a brand. So not only does it create a brand within a company, like I'm someone who's worked at a handful of different companies in my sales career, all in the same city, but you kind of build a brand for yourself in your city and in your network, right?
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
everyone's using LinkedIn nowadays. Like when I was looking for my current role, a couple people reached out to me who I had worked with before, right? Like Caesar actually connected me with the company that I'm now working for, totally on a referral that we had worked together, and he had nothing but nice things to say, and that made my interview process a whole lot easier. And it found me this company that I would have probably never heard of, right? So it's one of those things where I see a lot of friends who are like a have a specialization. They're a lawyer, an accountant, whatever. If they ever want to switch careers, they have to switch careers. Like they have to do something scary, something new, get a new designation, something. What
Start
I've
from
been
the
able
bottom, really.
Start from the bottom, yeah. Like what I've been able to do as an example, like Caesar is still in a producing role. He's an account executive. He sells to enterprise accounts. I've kind of done all the levels of beginner sales, SDR, BDR, AE, but then I jumped into account management, and now I'm a manager of a sales team. Um, I can't think of many other career paths that would allow you to have so many distinctly different jobs within that same skill set, right? Like if
Yeah.
you're in sales, you can become a consultant, you can become a software engineer, you can become a relationship person, like a relationship manager, you can be a people manager like I am now, you can become an enterprise closer like Caesar is. And the beauty is, once you've built up this experience and a brand like Caesar mentioned, you can jump around almost at your whim, right? Like I could easily go back to being an account executive, an account manager. I wouldn't want to be an SDR or BDR again because I need to make money. I have a house and stuff, but you could do it, right? That's the beauty of it. Like your skills stay with you as long as you stay in sales and are practicing and talking to clients and being strategic, and it gives you options that you can jump around in. Like I can't imagine myself doing pretty much anything that's not at least somewhat related to selling or talking or doing something with, offering a solution to people. And I'm only in this position because I started doing sales, right? Like if
100%.
if I wanted to get a different job in a different career that pays me what I make now or close to it, I'd have to go back to university, take some professional certification course, something, right? Like it's just not going to happen unless I do that, right? Like how do you feel?
And like I think looking like for example now the way recruiters reach out to people, right? Looking at your LinkedIn, they don't. I feel like people don't care too much about a resume anymore, or a lot of things come from like you said referrals, like being able to build yourself into an individual that other people want to work with or want to work for in your case allows you to have that flexibility to kind of pick and choose what your next step is.
Yeah.
As you said, like if you're in a different role, you're kind of stuck in that role.
Yep.
um, you
Yeah,
know
definitely.
sales can also get you into marketing, right?
Yeah,
Like
for sure.
there are a lot of different things that your ability to be being a person right in front center when it comes to sales allows you to get into those marketing roles, partnership roles,
Even
where you,
CEO, like, sorry to
yeah,
interrupt, but like my fiance and I went through an exercise where we looked up tech CEOs in Toronto, and like 80% of them or more
start
were
off in
in
sales.
sales. Yeah, like
Yeah,
they were like a entry level sales with like an arts degree, like, and then they climbed up, became sales manager, VP, and eventually are running the company, which is amazing because you normally think CEO, you're like, oh, they founded the company. No,
yeah.
there's a different path to getting into that type of a seat, right? And it seems to be having some sort of experience in sales. Anyways, sorry I cut you off, but
No,
continue.
no, no. That's a great point because being in this particular role or this particular part of the business is one of the more fundamental pieces of understanding your business, right?
Yeah,
You understand what your end product is,
who your
why
customers
people,
are.
who your customers are, why they need you, and you can always relay that back to saying, okay, as you progress in your business, like in your career, whether you stay in the same company or not, you're going to be able to kind of position yourself as to why you did well here, how you're able to understand your customer needs, and then obviously get into, for example, a higher role of like a VP or even a CEO, right? Because you were in those trenches. The people that you're going to be working with or working for you will understand. You've been in that role. You understand how hard it can be, right? And to be fair, it speaks volumes of who you are as well, right? Because it is, you understand the grind. Really,
Yep.
you do understand the grind of what sales is, right? So,
Yeah. Like it's so interesting because you mentioned marketing. Um, Having that sales experience, like in that different discipline, marketing is connected to sales but different. You have validation that you know what the marketing needs to accomplish because you have been that person on the other end of the lead funnel who is getting either the crappy or fantastic leads,
yeah,
and and you remember where they came from. So you're an asset there. As a CEO, you've been in the trenches, you've earned the respect of your team, so the directives you pass down with regard to process or company vision or what customers to go after, people are going to listen to you. Like you become this like multidisciplinary person. I feel like it's like having sales experience gives you business street smarts because
oh, 100%.
you know what I mean? Because like
That's a great way of saying it.
yeah, because you're learning about the customers on a large scale because you're talking to so many of them. You're learning what they hate and what they love. You're learning how to sell to them, and then knowing that information essentially arms you with what you need to grow that your business as a whole. Because then you
Yeah,
can kind of train the rest of the team to do that. You can kind of create customer profiles and target them based on your experience, which is essentially what running a software company is outside of obviously developing and doing the
picking the
software
right
part of it.
people. Yeah,
Yeah, and hiring and all that.
I,
But yeah, it's pretty cool. That was a pretty cool analogy. But
I
yeah,
think one just as just one more point. Sales is probably at the center point, or a sales position is the center point of connecting to every part of the business,
yep,
finance, marketing, business development, other elements of like customer success, product, right? Because, as you said earlier, you're understanding what the customer does and does not like. And you can bring that information to product, for example. whether or
Yeah.
not they take that advice or not. But if you have 4 or 5 different customers that are asking for something, that becomes something that you can arm yourself to have those discussions with, right? So you are the essential point to be able to bring so much information to so many things within your company. And if you're really good at it, you're going to be noticed, and people are either going to value you or another company is going to value those traits as well, right? So
Yeah.
I
Cool,
think this is a
Caesar.
good point to
Yeah.
end at.
Yeah, this was a good conversation. I mean, I think we covered a lot. We started this by like really being super negative about how hard sales is, but I feel like
No,
now we ended on this like high that sales is like the gateway to so many different jobs. But
it, especially
again,
it's something that if you stick at it, you're gonna have a great opportunity to be something that you weren't expecting when you got into sales. I think that's the best way of saying it is, when you get in sales, you're not really expecting much other than trying to make money, but there's so much more to the path that you get on that, you don't know what you don't know. And when you get there, you're going to be pleasantly surprised.
yeah. Well, Caesar, that was a beautiful way to end it. So, guys, I'm going to do the honors. Thank you so much for watching, Caesar. It's been a pleasure chatting. We'll catch you next time on Sales Talk with Mike and Caesar. See you guys.
Thank you. Peace.